Hi, guys. Well, here we are again talking about coaching. And as always, I'm here with Yannick and Siawash. Hi,
Hello.
guys. Hey, good to see you. So, right, today we've got a really interesting question, I think. And the question is, what can I, as a coach, expect from my clients?
Huh.
It's a good one.
Yes, yes. Actually forgot where we picked that up, but it certainly comes up a lot when I supervise people ask themselves a lot what their clients expect from them. Right? There's almost to a point of where people are really under pressure, or they feel like there's so many expectations on me. Clients come to the coaching to expect the coaching to work, and I have to make the coaching work because I'm the coach, right? They're paying me for my service, so I need to make it work for them. I think it's an important question to ask. What do I take responsibility for? But as part of the contracting conversation, as part of co-creating this space, I think it's really important that we talk to our clients about what we expect from them. And for some coaches, it felt like a really counterintuitive question to ask, but also a quite liberating one in the end. So I'll pause there and see what you guys think. Where you're at with that question. Sivash has a big smile on his face, so I think I think he has a take on this.
Yeah. I think it's a great question because often as coaches, most of the focus is on like how do I get better, and that's been my focus. Like how do I get better, and then usually there's this question as well, like how do I get good results for my clients, right? How can I create this? And I think the first word I wrote down is a co-creation. I think you touched on that, right? It doesn't matter how good you are as a coach if you can't like set the relationship up in a powerful way, like in a way that serves both parties. The result might not be actually as you wanted, right? And yes, some people have experience being coached, but I think the majority of people actually don't have experience. And it's in 6 years. It's the first. Recently, I read a book and I interviewed actually the author of the book, and it's the first book I've come across in 6 years. It's called "How to Get the Most Out of Coaching," right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's a book actually written for clients, for people that are being coached. And I think it's such a great book. And again, here with this question, it's like, what can I expect from my clients? I think it's, as coaches, we really want to first think about like, hey, what would make this a successful relationship? And then how can we communicate those expectations? Like if I expect my clients to be on time, I expect them to be in a quiet place, to be really present. If we don't communicate that, it will just be an expectation, right? But if we communicate that, we can create that container together. I remember someone that paid a lot of money for coaching all showed up in the gym on a bike on a coaching session. And I thought, well, hey, you know what? Initially I was frustrated, but then when I reflected on it, I thought, well, it's part of it. I didn't communicate this properly. I didn't set up this relationship properly. Yeah. Let me pause there. Yeah.
Yeah, so you took some responsibility for how you set this up, right? So what our clients can expect from us, perhaps. I mean, everybody sets their business up in a different way and everybody practices in a different way. But like my clients can expect from me that I'll bring some of the stuff up that we need to contract, that we need to agree on, right? And I want to talk about what's your responsibility and what's mine. And what are you taking responsibility for? I want my client to take as much responsibility for this as possible. I don't know, Nicki, what do you think?
I think it's really great. I think I totally agree with what you guys have been saying. Like, especially, I think, the first thing I think when I think of coaching is the word collaboration. I think, some people maybe who come to coaching for the first time and, maybe from how coaching is often represented, can see coaches as some sort of miracle workers and come into coaching with a lot of expectations maybe from their coach. And I think, one thing I feel strongly about is the idea of empowering my client to take responsibility for themselves, for their lives, for their outcome. So again, it's, and that's something that I put in my contracting as well, in the paper contract before, as they sign kind of their agreement, is kind of, it clearly outlines the terms of, what I'm promising to deliver or to bring to our conversations, and also what I expect of them in order for this coaching agreement to work. So yeah, I think it's really important to remember that ultimately, a lot of the responsibility for the outcome, if not most of it, rests with the client, and we're just kind of here as facilitators to, enable their personal development and thinking process.
Yeah. It's so interesting what's unspoken very often, and what for many people goes without saying doesn't necessarily go without saying. Right? You have a lot of background noise on today. Was that your responsibility? Well, actually got in touch before and you were like, well, this has happened. The basement is like literally underwater. The electricity went, you actually showed a lot of taking responsibility by showing up in the most quiet place you could find, so we can have this conversation. So I would appreciate that, whereas I could also have different assumptions if we hadn't talked about it beforehand. Right. So I think that's where the important bit comes in. I always go on about contracting, and I actually noticed I'm doing less and less contracting the more I have been coaching. And I'm like, it's a good reminder often to go back and reflect on what goes without saying for me that might not go without saying for this person. Because the person in the gym tuning in for the coaching session, might have not thought that that's, frowned upon in any way. Because what have we not talked about? So this is happening. How can we engage with that? And at that moment, perhaps recontract in a way that offers, assumes best intentions on the side of the client.
I think it's also a really interesting space, come to think of it, and thinking of one of our other questions that we've got this time. It's a really interesting space for kind of personal learning and reflection about ourselves, and also about how our client shows up. I'm thinking more in in terms of things like transactional analysis, maybe, are we the ones as coaches who have a tendency as characters to take responsibility and to assume the role of the hero? Are we working with the kind of clients who tend to see themselves as victims and kind of rely on others to kind of solve the problems in their lives? So, I think the dynamics, and maybe this comes a bit out of therapy as well, I think it's interesting to witness between you and your client the kind of dynamics that evolve. And, for some people that can maybe even be relevant to bring into the conversation.
Yeah. So as soon as the client turns up in a particular way that we feel they've taken too much or too little responsibility, whatever it is, it's already super interesting to just kind of acknowledge that and take note of it, and perhaps take that as a doorway into talking about your general relationship with taking responsibility or not taking responsibility. So I find that super fascinating. So it's not just about, okay, we're co-creating the space here, but also in the way that you relate to the space and how little or how much responsibility you want to take in the space tells me something about who you are as a person.
Yeah, I really like the questions that you mentioned at the beginning around responsibility. I think for coaches, it takes courage to bring those questions up, because, it's very easy, I think, also for coaches to say, well, I'm just, and again, this is not a judgment, but again, it's very easy to say that, my role is just to hold the space, and, results are not in my control, right? But we actually have so much influence on the container that we create together. And again, as every single coach has a different way of working, but I think the more responsibility we take as a coach, we can actually really we can help our clients to take more responsibility by bringing these questions up.
Yeah, and we've been using responsibility and expectations kind of in a similar, very similar way, almost interchangeably. And I think the language we use can have quite an impact here. Because if I'm asking, what are you taking responsibility for? Let's have a conversation about what are my responsibilities? What are your responsibilities here as we journey together? Sounds very different to, here's what I expect from you, which some people might hear as, oh, now there's expectations, and they might have a difficult relationship with being expected, having things expected of them. Again, could open fantastic doors into who you are as a person and what's that relationship about. So you might jump straight into something. But you might want to use language in the beginning to make this as productive as possible.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think for me, again, what's coming up is the thought that ultimately what we want to do is not create a relationship in which there's a sort of dependence of the client on the coach, going forward and long term. What we want to do is kind of support our clients during a certain period of time or for a number of sessions, and more all the time enable them and give them the tools to kind of support themselves better and grow independently without us.
Yeah. So what do you tell them then? Well, if there was a question, if you would give your client a little speech about what you expect of them, what do you think their responsibility is here? What would you say to them?
Good question. I think for me at the start of the relationship, it's co-creating few agreements. Mm-hmm. So, for example, one could be that if we discuss that there's something like there's field work, there's homework to be done between sessions. If we discuss it and you agree on it, that you make that a priority. And if for whatever reason you cannot do it within that time period, you let me know beforehand. So that's one thing. Another thing is, I think, a conversation about timing, being on time. If there are payments involved, like if there's a monthly payment plan, a conversation about that. And I think the more what I've just noticed in my own experiences, the more I bring a lot of these things have come up from experience, noticing little things that I had expectations of, and the expectations weren't met. And I noticed that, hey, I didn't communicate that clearly. Mm-hmm. And actually it got in the way of the coaching relationship. For me, right now, the money conversation is only once and then it's done. Whether it's an upfront payment or whether it's monthly payments, but usually it's just one conversation and we just talk about that and make sure that it's very clear and it's on paper, and then it's done. And it doesn't get actually in the way of the coaching agreement. And I think also really important is that I used to think that this conversation is more for me, but actually it's just to create a win-win scenario here, right? And some things, you can create an agreement around some things and you need to bring it up again. Right. And I think that's where the coaching is. But for me, personally, is I think around field work, around payments, around timing. And also I think around, around the idea of that things are not always going to be easy. Right. Around the idea that sometimes you will be challenged. Sometimes, it'll take courage to discuss certain things. But again, just reminding them that this is a safe space, right? And I think just setting up that container. I think those are some of the basic things that come up for me right now. But I think, those are probably the fundamental things.
Nicki?
Sorry, are you asking me to?
Yeah.
The same question.
What do you expect from your clients?
I mean, definitely taking ultimately responsibility for their outcome. Also, I will ask clients at the beginning in terms of contracting, is doing homework something that you would like to do as part of our coaching? If they say yes, I will say, how would you like me to respond to you in a case where you haven't done the homework, or would you like me to check in with you? I kind of try and, make it as accessible as possible for them, but ultimately kind of emphasize, if not directly, although it's direct in the contract, the collaborative aspect and the co-responsibility in different ways. So yeah, I think again, so much of it is going with the individual and just trying to be as clear as possible from the outset.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think that what I want to highlight there is that what's always important to me is that people are speaking up when something is not working for them or when something is working particularly well for them. And I often check into that, but I want to have an agreement where my clients know that I expect them to be really open in this space, most of all to themselves. But that includes me, and that kind of that integrity of following up on what they commit to, but not in a way that they feel they're putting all of this pressure and accountability on them, which I know kind of works, but I'd much rather have someone not follow up on their commitments, but then again, circling back, be really open about what was going on there so that we can look at it. And then there's a few bits in the contract around what I expect of them. Some of that is just kind of tick box exercises. Something that I don't necessarily want to spend lots of time talking about during the session, but some things that I want us to be on the same page about. That's part of why I started using written contracts, so that we're literally on the same page on some of those things. What are you committing to? And that also, like Siawash said, includes payments or stopping group membership, for example. What's happening when somebody wants to leave or take a break or whatever, so I think it's really helpful for every coach to think about what would be my list of what I expect, because they're going to be different from coach to coach. It depends so much on who you work with and how you work. So it'll be super interesting to see some of those lists perhaps from people out there. If you have one, or if you've made one based on what we just talked about, just kind of post it in the comments. Here's a list of my expectations to my clients.
Yeah, and I think it's also important to the willingness to experiment, right? I think there's not one way. I joined the program a few years ago, and it was a business program, but in the first session there was like an A4 page, and they said, here are 15, I think there were around 15, 20 things. Here are things you can expect from us. And there's on the other side, there were like 5 things. Here's what we expect from you. Right. And I think it's just really powerful to show it like that. And again, everyone, you can do it in different ways. I mean, that was more a business mentoring, business coaching program. But I think it's setting the container up in the right way. I think it's so powerful. And again, just the willingness to experiment. You might notice that you didn't talk about something and you want to bring it in with the next client.
Yeah. Willingness to experiment, willingness to leave your comfort zone, willingness to follow up on commitments, or just generally be really open and really engage in the space, engage in the work, speak up if things work or don't work. I think it's a really good start of a list.
Cool, guys. Thank you. Really enjoyed that. That was really helpful. And I'll definitely be thinking about that more and making my own list as well.
Great. Well, let's leave that here. I think I've said all I wanted to say for now, and I'd like to see some of those lists, and always, send us some questions.
Thank you for being with us today. I appreciate your commitment to learning and growing as a coach. Just a few things before you go. First of all, we're doing this for you, so if there's anything you'd like us to talk about, do send us a question. Secondly, we're not doing this for profit, so we rely on your support to help us reach as many coaches as we can. So if you can send this episode to a friend or tell a fellow coach about what we're doing here, maybe you can subscribe or leave us a review, or even support us on Patreon. That would be amazing. And lastly, you can find us across all major platforms. So whether you like to watch, or you like to listen, or you like to download episodes and listen to it in your car while you're driving through somewhere with no internet, you can do so too. And that's it from us. Thank you, and I hope to see you next time.